Welcome. StephenGray here again. This is my series of interviews that I've been doing for the YouTube channel StephenGray Vision and the accompanying audio podcast Anchor.fm. The mission of these is to share information and inspiration that will hopefully help humanity come to terms with who we are, what we're going through now, and where we are going. Because of my background and my interests and my connection to things like the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, there is a particular focus on psychedelics, otherwise known as entheogens, but not solely those. And as you can see, if you're watching this, the video version of this on YouTube, my guest is with me already, and I will now introduce him by reading his bio, and then I will welcome him in. This is Dr. Bruce Damer, and he's an astrobiologist. Excuse me, I'm just going to move that right in the middle. Is an astrobiologist collaborating with Professor David Deamer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in the Department of Biomolecular Engineering at the University of California, Santa Cruz, on the question of the origin of life. He has contributed 20 years of mission simulation and design for NASA and other space agencies on the related question of how life might begin on other worlds and how to extend life and human civilization into our solar system. His training is in computer science, and he has built an extensive archive of computing artifacts and history chronicling the rise of the digital world in the last 60 years. He is also a follower of the evolutionary edge of culture as a wanderer on the plant medicine path, and curates archives of figures such as Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna, who I will add Bruce knew. Excuse me. More can be found on Bruce Damer's work and life in his Levity Zone podcast, Levity Salons on Patreon, and scientific writings, all available at his website, damer.com. That is spelled DAMER.com. And I will add a slight bit of colloquial information to that bio by saying that I know Bruce personally. He has spoken at our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference twice in the past, and although his bio doesn't say it, because of course you wouldn't say that about yourself, but Bruce is truly brilliant. Some people might rightfully call him a genius. I hope I'm not embarrassing you by saying so, Bruce. And I would definitely call Bruce Damer a visionary, one of the more sensitive people to energies that other people are not particularly aware of or tuned in oftentimes, as Bruce quite openly speaks about himself in some of his stories about his early upbringing and so on that led him certain directions. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Stephen. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. You know, I have a lot of respect for your work, and we've had a number of conversations. I've occasionally said, wait a minute, Bruce, I got to pull out my iPhone here and put voice record on. I want to be able to remember what you're saying here. So I have a number of questions for you, of course, but as I mentioned in our discussion prior to hitting the record button for this, the main mission, and also I guess I said it to the public as well here, is to take a look at the state and fate of humanity, but also offer, I would say, you know, a hopeful and positive kind of a vision. And I've both watched and listened to a webinar that you did about a month ago, and was among other things, deeply impressed by your positive vision. So maybe one question that might actually allow me to sit back and just listen for a while would be, what's going on with this pandemic?
Well, you know, humanity is evolved by pandemics. Our species was toughened, winnowed down, redistributed, evolved by pandemics. People just have, in a sense, we all have a short memory because we've had the miracle of antibiotics and vaccines and things like that. But as recently as the 1930s and into the 1940s, Washington, D.C. was an unsafe place to be in the summertime. And if people recall President Adams decanting from the Capitol because of the yellow fever. So the founding fathers of the U.S. had to leave because yellow fever was coming up from the south, and it would take thousands of people, and it was a dangerous place to be. So only the poor people who had to stay stayed in these areas where these pandemics were moving through. You had malaria, scarlet fever. You had, of course, in the 1819 period, you had a much more virulent and dangerous viral pandemic, which, by all accounts, laid low or killed between 100 million and several hundred million individuals while traveling by steamship. And the Spanish flu of that time, of a century ago, targeted healthy adults between ages 20 and 40. So the 1920s opened with all these orphans. And in those years, they didn't know what a virus was. You know, the human genome, the idea of DNA hadn't been decoded. I mean, so an RNA virus was something far beyond the ability of science at the time to even decode what was going on. So it was a lot of guesswork. But we've grown up with viral pandemics, and in fact, viruses possibly emerged as life emerged on the Earth 4 billion years ago. There was some sort of protovirus in those early microbial colonies that forced evolution, because some viruses are beneficial to the colony in that they can carry information around. Some are challenging and stressing to even single-celled organisms. And I believe what's happening now is exactly what happens in a deer population when you get rid of the wolves. So where I grew up in central British Columbia in the Kamloops area, I remember just north of us in the 70s where the wolf population had died from disease, actually, and lumber companies had cut the forest, so they created all this new foraging area for deer. There was an explosion of the deer population, and then a virus came in, and the virus cut the deer population back. BC Forestry realized they had to do something, so they introduced the wolves back, because the deer population was never going to be healthy without a governing mechanism. So the natural governing of that population was a viral pandemic in the deer population, and that's what's happening now for us. You know, we are out of equilibrium, just as when systems get out of equilibrium in nature, it opens opportunities. So if you look at the profile of coronavirus, the new coronavirus, it seems to, it of course is attacking people with compromised immune systems. The healthy adults it's attacking are often in highly polluted areas. So in the outbreak zones of China, in northern Italy, areas with challenged air quality, which take healthy people to the edge of exposing a weakness in their system, because the coronavirus seems to exhibit as a high altitude disease, as people turn blue, literally. So what it's doing is nature will always find a way to get into a reservoir of vulnerable population, which may have autoimmune issues, or there may be a large number of older people who are barely at the edge of surviving anyway, and basically do a culling through the population. And that is how healthy populations are maintained. They rely upon a healthy population of deer in British Columbia. It doesn't call in the virus, but the virus makes it healthy, so that the deer can go forward into the future, not as sick herds, but as a healthy, smaller population. So animal populations and plant populations alike have relied upon the appearance of a pathogen to take them back toward equilibrium. And we have been so skilled as a species of blocking the natural course of things that our population has, gone way out of proportion to the carrying capacity. And we've also polluted our environments. We've put people under stress. We've introduced foodstuffs and lifestyles that have caused their immune systems to be challenged. And so, of course, if you're trying to hold back a rising tide or a rising river, and you're stacking bags of cement on the top to keep that dike away from you, you reach a point where the pressure, the water pressure on those sacks of sand or cement is so high that inevitably it breaks through. Because you can only hold back the tide of the regulatory function of the biosphere for so long, and then you get this pressure and it's going to push through. And so, for example, natural selection, good old-fashioned Darwinian natural selection, is now at work on the human population in a very gentle way. So the initial contagion, or the virus, is not that, it's not as serious as the Spanish flu. So it's not going to chop a huge section of the population. It's not going to kill 1 billion healthy adults on this round, which if Spanish flu was here today traveling by air, it would. It would have taken 1 billion healthy adults. So we've been given kind of a shot across the bow, a warning that this is coming. This regulatory function is now at work in the biosphere. And it's an interesting thing to watch, to see this. Now, of course, the way that's sort of a cold or dissociated analytical approach to this. But what it is it's natural selection at work. So, for example, the countries like Brazil or the United States, which have kind of madmen as leaders, people that have no common sense, people in a sense, operating from not the best interests of the people, operating through self-interest, operating through just reaction. People that should not be in leadership positions at all, should not be. They are going to select the populations out. So the people who supported them, unfortunately, and the people who did not support them, are going to take the brunt of some of the fatalities. So these countries which are led by effectively incompetent people are going to get selected out, pandemic after pandemic. A country like New Zealand, which was led by sane people, yesterday relaxed all their controls internally because there's virtually no cases. They have biosecurity, they're on their own island, which helps, but they have a population that is sort of safe and sane. We were just there in February, just before the pandemic, doing our field work in the Rotorua in the hot springs, Origin of Life field work. And you feel very safe. You feel where the country has taken care of its people. It's a conscious country. And so it will emerge as a model that succeeds in the world economy or the world's culture or whatever. And other nations, say, unfortunately, like Brazil or the United States, are going to go down a notch. And the United States is going to undergo an additional transformation, which we've been talking about here in Silicon Valley, which is as the United States central government falls apart, which is it's becoming less, it's not an effective tool. States and bioregions take over. And so Northern California or the Bay Area or the West Coast becomes almost like an autonomous enclave over time, where they block crazy federal intrusions and rules. And this has been happening for about 25 years now with California. As Governor Jerry Brown, our former governor, said, we've been withdrawing from the federal system for a quarter century. When they put restrictions on stem cell research, we authorized it. When they fought us on medical marijuana, we passed it. Again and again and again, California has acted in the interests that made sense to it and for its citizens, and basically telling the federal government to stay out. So it's been, in some sense, withdrawing from the union or from the requirements of a federal government that less functional and becoming more of an autonomous region. And that's going to be accelerated by this. So you'll see, if Florida has 500,000 fatalities for coronavirus and a broken health care system, Florida goes out of the league. It goes, what businesses are going to locate in Florida? Who's going to want to go on vacation in Florida? It's going to take itself out of, through natural selection, it's taking itself out of participation. Other regions will rise and become stronger. And similarly with populations, we have, a good percentage of young people in their teenage years that now have autoimmune disorders, probably from glyphosate in the environment and other chemicals that young people weren't sick when they were 15 in our era. They weren't sick at this level. Well, these viral pandemics are going to take them out of the gene pool, and they're going to take their parents out of the gene pool. So gradually you get this combing process where, just like the deer, you remove the sick ones, you remove the older ones, you remove the ones that have made poor life choices, and you leave the healthy populations in pockets, and then those pockets expand outward. And
so, can I interrupt for a sec? Excuse me. That's, I don't know, I'm not quite sure the right descriptor for it, but it's a kind of a more on the somewhat materialistic, mechanistic kind of level of sort of natural forces, doing their thing, as it were. But you've also taken this, the implications of this pandemic to a much more esoteric, kind of deeper level about the possibility of, a more radical, a more dramatic consciousness transformation, you might say, and tied it into that. Can you elaborate on that? Let me just actually read you or read people the subtitle on your website. It says, quote, "As we remake ourselves, the world will follow us into the great project of being." So I'm hoping to lead you more into that direction now, if I may. Can you elaborate on what that all means?
Yeah, I suppose our previous conversation was a bit depressing, that it's so materialistic. I mean, it's so reductionistic, or based on a more pragmatic approach. But I think that all of this, in some ways, if you look at the patterns of things, if you look at the 21st century, and you look at the struggle that people have had for their own health and healing, for awakening, coming into a broader awareness of the miracle of the world that we're all in, there's been one major obstruction to this awakening, and that is simply a busyness. It's simply that there's no quiet time, there's no calm, there's no ability to slow down. 2019 was not only the best year materially for humans on the earth, if you look at all the measures of health, literacy, access to information, travel, it was like the best year we've ever had in terms of what the Enlightenment provided from the Amazon to the tip of Kamchatka. It was the best year for humans, but also it was the most frenetic year in history. That more people traveling, more people doing more interaction on devices, faster and faster and faster, more consumption of material goods, all this sort of stuff. And I felt myself reaching a point in February where, as much as I would have liked to go on a 2-week meditation retreat or a plant medicine path, fitting it in was getting difficult. And so my own ability to slow my system down and come into a greater sort of spacious awareness and work on healing the parts that I need to heal was really hampered by just this crazy schedule. And then suddenly the gift was given to us of the slowing down, the great slowing down, which is really what this is, because it's not a huge health, it's not ripping society apart, it's slowing the pace down. So that 50% drop in insect population that was announced last year, along with Greta Thunberg's warnings and along with all those other things, got answered in a single stroke. That the answer to, in a sense, the crazy pace of life, the crashing insect populations, climate change, all these things was this pandemic. The pandemic that forced people to stay in place, to stop traveling. Traveling's down 75 to 95%. Consumable goods down, everything down. Skies clearing, birds building nests on lampposts in New York City. Just boom, we were shown how we can take the pressure off of the earth and give ourselves back that precious resource of personal time for contemplation, if we should be able to use it. Now, of course, there are people who can't take that time, but this forced deceleration has caused a pattern interrupt. The term pattern interrupt in this entire program, and has shaken it apart, because that original program of 2019 was absolutely unsustainable. It was getting ready to smash people's consciousnesses on brick walls. It was just too much, too fast, too much stuff for the human animal. Even though we have a hunger, our minds have a hunger for more stimulation, more, we all want to go to festivals, and there's more conferences, and the conferences are growing larger as yours has been growing larger. This hunger for information, hunger for interaction. But I think it had gone across a threshold where we were becoming almost robotic in responding to the next project and mission and meeting and such, and the Moody Blues in Nights in White Satin, in that great poetic tone poem of a song in 1970s, said, with leisure you must first come to leisure, and with leisure comes love. So without leisure, you can't find love. You're closed off from a whole layer of conscious exploration and experience from busyness. So perhaps that's the great teaching of this pandemic.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, they're one of my favorite little Buddhist, Zen Buddhist, I think, aphorisms. I don't remember the last part of it that kind of goes into more detail on the fourth thing, but it says, to study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to enter into the myriad of things. And so I think that really ties into what you're saying, that we're just moving too fast to be able to, meet the world at multiple levels of what's going on around us. I completely agree with that. So that's obviously key. This slowing down thing, obviously key to the remaking of ourselves that's stated in your subtitle on your website there. I would like to ask you if you could elaborate on more on what's involved in remaking ourselves. And before I turn that over to you, hoping at some point we could get in a little reference to how the psychedelics may play a role in that, since the subtitle of my YouTube channel is Spirituality, Psychedelics, and the New Human, or the New Humanity. Yeah.
I believe that there's something going on. Terence used to say, ask the question, what is going on? You remember how he used to say, what is going on? And the thing that's going on, and this is a bit of a diversion, but it'll come back to addressing your very cogent question. There's a new force in the world. There's a new force at play. And it comes down to the sense that if you wish and desire something, if you have a clear vision for it, the little stepping stones are presented to you that if you take, you end up in improbable outcomes, like growing spirit plant medicine to 600 people, doing it at UBC, medical and then recreational marijuana comes in, the country opens up, we have MAPS Canada, we have clinical trials, and then we have phase 3 clinical trials, and we have this incredible opening that started with the desire of, say, Rick Doblin and many of us that these medicines should be available. And by golly, they are. And no matter what is happening in the political sphere, the crack opened and the possibility became reality. And so we're just, I think, discovering that it is our intention, our clear intention on this is a vision we'd love to see, and holding to that, and our attention on the little marbles of goodness, of possibility that are sent our way from what I'm calling and others are calling the field. It's not God, it's not a mycelial layer or something physical. It's some kind of interconnected, numinous, rolling system that wraps itself around the hillocks and valleys of probability itself. And it can shape those hillocks and valleys. And our intention goes in there, and just like Einstein's, relativity, shaping space and time of 100 years ago, it changes the shape not of space and time but of probability. It's a probability shaping. Our human conscious attention can shape probability. And I think we're on the verge of discovering this. Joe Dispenza does these fantastic experiments where he has people connect their heart here, the heart of sort of clarity and presence, with the mind's fantastic ability to visualize, and have them focus on one thing, groups focus on one thing, and watch how it actualizes with the head and the heart. And there are people, serious kind of researchy people now stepping in saying, maybe it's our intention alone that can shape reality. And I have a funny term for this. I call it God for geeks. So we're so used to operating systems and apps and services and making search engine calls and SQL queries and everything. What if this intensely dense numinous network that we're in, that we actually can surf when we're in the medicine state of we're floating on it, we're like really present in it. What if that is like an OS? What if it's an environment that it serves us with our consciousness as the tool, as the app, as the button, the home button to push, and then the apps to talk to that thing? And so for the last couple of years, I've been doing experiments in this. I've been putting things out into the field and watching. I've been having A/B comparisons on this thing and watching it accelerate. So in my own life, the rate at which improbable events are coming back is faster and faster and faster. And I ask the question, is it because I'm more attuned, or is it that the field is more attuned? And I believe it's a little of both, but I think that if you densely interconnect anything, microbial layer with chemical signaling, which is how life possibly started, then you introduce bird song, for example, densely interconnects the interaction in a forest, for example. Humans with symbolic communication, then with smartphones, dense interconnection, dense real-time speed of light flashes from human to human all over the planet. 3 billion people now able to do this. Searching, finding a YouTube video, playing it, sharing it. It's an amazing thing that in itself is creating this field stronger and stronger and stronger, and the field itself is waking up. The field itself has more to play with. It's getting more coherent, and like an organism, it's starting to operate as a coherent thing, as a thing that is moving towards survival. And I had a vision about 3 months ago where I saw this pseudopod creature made out of shadow, and it was moving. It was like kind of like when you see a salamander, but in a salamander in shadow form, moving forward. And the words came to me at the time was, this is new. This is a new organism that's just learning to push forward towards survival, as all organisms do. But it is an organism made of you. It is made of human beings. For the first time, a body like Gaia but it is a thing of humans themselves and their intentions and their explorations and their desires and wishes and their actions and their communication. It's growing up as a meta-organism, a little bit like the old idea of the global brain, but more like a global body. And when things come into coherency, no matter what they're made out of, whether they're made out of cells or conscious intention, they become like an organism. They're a superorganism. And this superorganism of humans pushing forward, humans being in a panic state, humans desiring, humans innovating, humans being under stress, is a single organism on its own. And it crawls forward, and it's booting up the field itself. And so it's not just us. It's not just the action of one person. It's a thing that we all comprise, and that thing is 4 billion years old. It has huge lineage in its genes. It has everything we've got. It has a waking realization that we're extremely rare. This kind of a planet, we now know through exoplanet studies and the origin of life that complex life like ours is extraordinarily rare. And we also know we're time limited, that the Earth has maybe a few 100 million years where you can have plants, for example, because we're going to cross the Venus terminator. We're going into a heat event from the heating of the sun. There's like a pressure. We're going to turn into Venus in a shorter period of time than we knew. So
what do you mean turn closer toward it or heat up?
We're going to heat up. So James Lovelock, in his book Rough Ride to the Future, he's the scientist who
a guy
and predicted the ozone hole. Actually discovered the ozone hole, taking a trip down to the South Atlantic with his gas measuring instruments. Discovered there was a hole on the ozone that we had to do something about. So he did a calculation that predicted that within 100 to 200 million years, we're crossing over this point where we go from 1.35 watts per square meter of incident solar radiation to 1.5. And when we go across that, the atmosphere can have no CO2 in it, or we go to runaway greenhouse. So we're crossing over that boundary where Venus crossed billions of years ago, probably, and the oceans evaporated into the atmosphere because any CO2 would lead to a runaway condition. So whether it's 100 million years or 300 million years, it's short. It's a percentile or two of the history of life on Earth remains for plants, for complex organisms. So we're the last. We're the last complex organisms. There's not any room, if this prediction is true, for a future for complex life here. So the pressure, when an organism is under threat for its survival collectively, it starts to get better and better and better at the survival game. And so I think that is what's happening. It's hard for me or any one person to see this whole picture, but I can feel the pressure from the collective field of the bolus of all of life pushing forward, trying to find solutions, because we have to reproduce the biosphere in some way. We have to go forward. We have to carry complex life into the universe, or it's just going to auto-extinguish. Where there's a limited dwell time. And like a good Hollywood thriller, it's a car chase at the end. Of course it's going to happen at the last minute. But all of this is piled up, and I think that everything that comes our way, whether it be crazy, insane leadership, is a teaching for us, pandemics, the great slowing down, cell phones, and especially plant medicines. Plant medicines are a doorway into a world which is beyond. It is the numinous field, and it's 1,000 million variations on the numinous field. But just like when you have a huge opening on meditation, when you have when your little parts fall away and you open to the big, I think that the plant medicines are pulling us faster and faster towards seeing this overview, seeing this hugeness of what this thing is. And the thing is us. The thing is the thing. It's not a creature coming from planet Zebel Ganubi. It is the collective of all of life, internetworked faster and faster against the pressure of faster and faster evolutionary forces that are now cultural and pushing towards survival. I think it's all about finding that doorway, finding that way to survive and thrive for the next billion years in some way. Because probabilistically, we're on a spire that's 4 billion years tall. We're way up here. This is where life started 4 billion years ago in some kind of hot spring setting. And it was jacked up by the rising of the sun every day to push energy into the system, to allow metabolism to happen, then selection to happen, then multicellularity to happen. And that sun just keeps rising and pushing us away from equilibrium to where we're in a point where we're in a potential gradient 4 billion years tall. And that potential gradient, as a ball rolling down a ramp is potential, as electrons piling up in a battery is a potential gradient. This is a probabilistic potential gradient, and it's powerful, and we can use that. And I think that it's not going to just go away. It has a mind of its own, in a sense, or a body of its own. And if we contact that mind, if we become that body, we'll find that way through. We are the vector. We are the seer. We are the ones with the hands. We're the ones that can push through that wormhole and allow the miracle of the life on this earth, the improbability of it, to go forward. And that is our responsibility. And it's happening. I mean, everything seems to be lining up for this to happen. But like any birth, it's going to be full of blood, sweat, and tears, and pain and confusion and crying and screaming and uncertainty whether the birth can happen. But it's from the long view of 4 billion years, I don't think this is going away. I think it is going to find a way to survive and to thrive. It's going to make a new world.
Excuse me. Reminds me of the kind of things that Terence used to talk about, your old friend Terence McKenna. He might have had the timeline a little bit wrong with this 2012 thing, but he talked, as you were saying that, I was thinking about that he might have been intuiting what you're talking about when he used the term the transcendental object at the end of time, and you're implying that it's us in the sense, right? So I could have a whole pile of questions about all that stuff, but I don't want to get in the way too much of what you have to share. But there was one thing that I wanted to ask you to go into a little bit more on the short term. Okay, so let me ask you this first. Do you see this happening? Like you say it's speeding up a lot, right? And Terence talked a lot about that too in his time wave theories and all these things. Do you see the likelihood of massive consciousness change happening soon, like within decades, for example?
I see it all around me. It's rolling everywhere. Because consciousness we can define in toto as the awake awareness of the individual to those things which drive us on a daily basis. So, for example, 5-10 years ago, you never would have heard most people in business, nerds, ordinary people out there talking about trauma and the role of trauma and what drives us. And now you hear it all the time. You hear, wow, I'm feeling a part of me that is starting to get activated. So 10 years ago, people would have think, you're being critical of me and I feel like you don't understand me, etc., etc. But now, this is all over the world that I've been, people are getting the language that stuff that comes up for them that is triggering for them isn't necessarily them. The language of parts, the language of, it's called internal family systems, all these practices like, yeah, hey, I'm an internal society of beings. And of course people can misinterpret all that and kind of go off the wall on that, but there's a real wisdom that is happening. in the change of language that, yeah, part of me got hurt by what you said, but it's just this part, and I'll explain where that came from. There was a friend of ours who used to just get triggered all the time, and she'd just start screaming. She'd just get triggered and start screaming. And it just used to bother us. It was hard to go over to their house and everything. And then one moment, we were all over at the house, and I think we were watching one of the Mars landings, and she said, I need to explain to you why I can do that and start screaming at people. Because that's what it was like in our family. Everything in our family was done by people getting upset and screaming to get their needs. And I can't control it in myself. It just takes me over. And we just came to her and we said, now, thank you for explaining this. It isn't you that's screaming, it's a little part that didn't get its needs met, and to survive it had to scream during the family. We came around her and gave her a huge hug. That relaxed her whole system. And now, for the last 10 years when we go to see her, it's like, how's a little part? And if the part comes up and she's stressed in the kitchen and she starts to scream, it's not her that's screaming. It's not her that we've separated our understanding of her from her part. And so there's a softening and a wisdom that is coming into this. And she says, look, I'm just a regular housewife. She's a Christian woman. She's not on the medicine path, but she's come to the self-awareness because the culture is bringing it. You are an operating system. You are complex parts. And you can feel yourself moving in and out of them. And it's a way of knowing thyself. And of course, in Buddhism and in meditation, of course, the whole point is to separate and watch the system, dissociate or separate and watch the system, and all the parts roll through and name them. Jack Kornfield talks about naming these things that come and roll through a system. Others talk about love those parts, love those things. And in the plant medicine path, you just become a complete open book, and then the medicine is coming in, and the parts are coming in. They're embodied as beings. They're little kids, or they're jaguars, or they're embodied, and they come out for resource. And the medicine gives them the resource. And we, as loving beings that say reparenting ourselves, watch how that happens. And when we're skillful, we'll go into the part and become the rage, but then pull out and let the rage be the rage, and let the medicine have the rage, and calm the rage and resource that rage. And we come out healed. And so this is the fundamental work of the 21st century. So when we look at someone like Donald Trump, we see a deeply wounded human being whose father abused him, all these sorts of things. And 20 years ago, I don't think there would have been language to describe why Donald Trump behaves. It would just be like, well, they're just that way, or we have to suffer through it. You can now take apart somebody like Donald Trump. You can have empathy and compassion for him, and you can also be discerning and wise about why people like that should never be in positions of authority, because you can predict what they're going to do, because the stresses of the job or ego or whatever is very predictable. Models have emerged. So
it's so interesting that just today, this is July 15th today? Anyway, 2020, his niece's book has just been approved for publication, and that's exactly what she's been saying about him, that he was deeply wounded as a child. I mean, this was obvious to many of us already anyway, but now, as you say, it's creeping out into the culture. So basically, I think if I may sort of summarize what you've been saying for the last 5 minutes or so, is that you see us, maybe two streams to it. One is the larger view that we are cohering together as a species, and that changes in the way that we think, or a way that our minds function in this world, are dispersing through the species quite rapidly and quite widely. And then, if I understood you correctly, you're also specifying it a little bit more by saying that a lot of what that is about self-examination and, in a sense, taking back our projections, as the Buddhists might say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 there's wisdom at all levels. I mean, and it's coming so quickly through the culture. I mean, let's face it. When you and I were growing up, we had 3 or 4, maybe cable TV. We had a few channels, and there were a few interesting shows and some dumb and junky shows, and we took some books out and everything. Now, I mean, you can watch 50 meaningful YouTube videos in a day in little snippets and get information so fast. I mean, if
Yeah.
like we need to find out about internal family systems healing or parts work or whatever, boom, there's the actual founder of the system demonstrating it. There's an animation that brings it so quickly, and the mind's like, wow, that's what that is. Let me share that with so and so, because they were looking for why it is they get triggered all the time, and they get the video and like, wow, that's a part, and I can work on that. And then they find a practitioner and they start working on Zoom, and within like an hour, a person has identified something in themselves, gotten new information, and is now on a practice to work on themselves. And that's how fast this is compared to the 80s or 70s, where it's like, grind along for years before we find solutions to things.
That morphic resonance on speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Rupert Sheldrake, right? And he talked about, how like a scientist in, say, the U.S. might have the same idea at the same time, more or less, as a scientist working on the same problem in Japan or whatever, right? It seems like a kind of an extension of that through technology now as well.
And Rupert and I met last summer at the IONS conference over here in Silicon Valley. And we had an interesting conversation, because what he said, this is quite fascinating, how the connection was. We never met, and we were at the reception for IONS, and someone, he had seen me I did the opening keynote for the IONS conference, and Rupert wanted to meet me, and we'd never met. And of course, I knew Ralph Abraham and Terrence, but I'd never met the third member of the Trialogues. And I saw him across the room, and I just didn't know how to go and introduce myself. But a friend brought him over. So suddenly there he was at my elbow. And we had the most delightful connection. And it was very much a morphic resonance connection, because Rupert said something, and I said, I know of your work because I've heard your voice a million times, because Lorenzo Haggerty and I decided to digitize all of the Trialogues tapes and put them into the Psychedelic Salon. And that's how I got to know who you were. And that Lorenzo flew up, and we started 3 boom boxes and put the cassette tapes in, and over a weekend digitized 90 cassettes. And Rupert beamed, and he said, I always wondered who put those things online, because those Trialogues, more than any other thing on the internet or any of my books, they built the morphic field for me. Those voice recordings built my audience. They established me in the field and brought all these new people and opportunities. And he said, I know who to thank for that. It's Lorenzo Haggerty and you. Digitizing those little crusty audio cassette tapes. And then it went from there, and we found a resonance between us, which was that if we have the formulation and the science and the chemistry to form protocells and to form aggregates of protocells that have function through polymers, we're doing this wet-dry cycling in the hot spring environments, we can actually test his morphogenetic field ideas. He came up with this. He said we could have a dish of them where a big clump is next to another dish, and then we could have an isolated dish of these cycling systems. And if the ones that there are more members and they're more close, evolve faster, then we've shown that there's a non-physical morphic field effect between those 2 adjacent dishes, whereas the isolated dish is like chugging along at a slower rate. And we could then actually study, well, what would the effect be of all this complex activity nearby in 2 fields? It would be the birth of the morphic field. It would be a way to test it in the laboratory. So we just got back in touch last month, and I'm going to send him a kind of a neat proposal for this because I'm getting ready to do a new book on all this stuff for maybe an academic book and a popular book at the same time. But so there we are now connected through the trialogues, accelerating into something that he can then take into his work, and his son, has come out with this fantastic new book.
I just bought it about a week ago. I've just started it. It's called
Yeah,
Entangled Life. Yeah.
and in
So could excuse me for breaking into your train of thought, but we're getting a little bit close to that hour that I spoke about, and obviously we could go on much longer, but Merlin, Rupert's son's book, reminded me of this, that one thing you haven't mentioned in this conversation, and is a theme that's being put forth as an important part of the consciousness transformation, is our learning to understand our proper relationship with nature, and the communication of nature. Like to begin to realize more about that. Plants often communicate, not just the ones that we call the psychedelic plants, but like Stephen Herod Buhner's work, for example, where he talks about how he sat down and meditated for hours at a time with various plants, and then they started to, feed him information about what they do. So I'm wondering how this is. We're talking about the human sphere mostly tonight, and where we're going with that, and I find it absolutely fascinating and central, for humanity. Where does the embeddedness and communication factor with nature come into all this?
Yeah, I think that what happens, like for instance, now we've had a beautiful spring and it's the summer. When we simply walk outside, anywhere from a building, which is more of a human space, and we're hit by sunlight on our skin and the fragrances in the breeze, all those spores and pollens and pheromones, the sounds of birds, the sounds of wind in the trees, were taken from the encased, human world, which is a lot of it's very mental, to our animal wakes up. Our natural being wakes up as soon as we walk into any natural setting. And physiologically, you could measure this, and perhaps people have, that boom, we're connected at a different level than we were when we got out of the car, for example. And everyone can feel this happening. And so it's the turning on of a huge amount of deep architecture, deep substructure that was installed a long time ago. That no matter how humans have been raised and what environments they've been raised, it's baked in. And so part of that, of course, is plants that we put in our bodies, and the food that we put in our bodies, and the medicines that we take, but the very presence in nature. It's like the difference between doing an Aya ceremony in an apartment in Brooklyn, which can be powerful, but doing it in the rainforest in the Amazon, where it's just an extraordinarily dense information grid. So much happens in that environment compared to the relatively dead environment of an apartment in Brooklyn, where you might be doing more internal work. So I think that the plants speak to us in ways that Dennis McKenna describes so beautifully. But we are the plants, and the plants are us. We are part of the cycle of the plants. We're in communication continuously, whether we can mentally work it out or not. We really are. And that's part of this idea of this field, that the field does extend beyond human mental construct. It is of the body. It's of the gut. It's the gut biome. So when we take a shit and run a huge amount of our gut biome into the environment, which is then returning into us. And people who spend a lot of time, a month or so in nature, they're totally changed by that, mentally and physically. They not even doing a plant medicine, just being the presence of the environment we were in which we were evolved. So it's really an A-B comparison. And perhaps you can sit in the room in Brooklyn and take the plant medicine, and it's so powerful that it will transport you to that jungle ethereally. It brings the plant and the jungle and all of that complexity and that feel into you, even though you're in an apartment in Brooklyn. So it is all connected. We live in a progenote planet, which was this new conception that life started as a communal complex, not an individual in competition, but as a community in collaboration. This is what's the huge philosophical implications of our work, is there was no common ancestor. It was only a common community, a communal complex of protocells that collectively could start to grow and evolve until individuals arose that could divide themselves, and until microbial mat communities arose till there was an individual mycelial thread that could go through it, or a plant that could come out of it, or then a worm that could start eating it. And then you got individual plants, animals, fungi, or fungal mats were always connected. And then here we are, a global, massive community, interdependent, sharing community of humans with culture, and we're birthing another thing out of that. And I think that thing is this collective conscious field that Jung, many have talked about. And so this stacking, and plants, of course, are part of that stacked layer, and they're all dependent upon that bottom layer of microbial mat, which is what's known as the consortium model. And then that came from the substrate of the cycling of the progenote. And so having that point of view of where we sit and where all of evolution sits in that stacked 4 billion year point of view gives us almost a samadhi kind of experience of opening of, my God, that's what this is. And then you lose the boundaries of the individual self through science, in a sense, not on a pillow, but just being awestruck by what is all around us and how it came to be so improbably over this 4 billion years. And so, in a sense, it's my science samadhi awakening through super geeking out on how things, that we're finally seeing how things arise. It's an amazing time. And one thing to sort of close with, if we're closing, it was during the 30 Years' War in Europe. There were all kinds of terrible things happening in Europe when the calculus was discovered. There were terrible things happening when Copernicus predicted that the Earth was not the center of all and there were other worlds, the Copernican revolution. There were terrible things happening when electromagnetism was characterized. All these things that when we look back to the 1860s or the 1720s, or we don't even remember all of the misdeeds of our forebears. We remember the beauty of the scientific discoveries of the structure of the cosmos, or the great music, or the arts. We remember that, and that is what survives. So to have faith, to have confidence and optimism, there is plenty going on right now in the 2020s that is extraordinary. Plenty is going on that's extraordinary. If we take our eyes just away a little bit from the crazy news sphere and the echo chambers and the anxiety-inducing things, and we plant our gaze and our hearts on the stupendously brilliant things that human beings are doing, the wise things, the insightful things that humans have never done before, the frontiers that we're in, that is what's going to count in 2050 or 2100. That's what's going to count. And the response to the pandemic is part of that brilliance. There are brilliant people who are looking at this. How can we use location information on our phones to block the spread of viruses in the future? Because we can outsmart the viruses. We have technology. This is a game. This is a war game, and it's making us better. It's making us smarter. And the smart people in the smart countries are going to succeed, and they're going to come out with societies that are smarter and healthier. So it's there's a tremendous time. All hope is not lost. In fact, there's more reasons for hope now than the crazy accelerated 2019 when we were so busy we couldn't even contact our own selves.
So the message is slow down, pay attention, have faith, something like that, right? Have some tentative hope and faith that in the great innovative imaginatory possibilities of the human species. And I'd like to think of it also as the fact that, you know, if you think of it in terms of Buddhism, the word Buddha just translates as awake, and that Buddhists, you know, keep reminding us that that is our nature. And one would like to think that we gradually fall into recognizing the divine, eternal nature of everything at some point.
Yeah, and it in modern healing arts and in psychology, it comes down to the parts that make us up. And I call it the little inner kindergarten. And I know these days, holy shoot, you know, Catherine's just said something that threw me into a part, and I'm now pouty and quiet. But that's not the response that Catherine could use or that the relationship could use. So I talk to the part. So instead of sulking and closing down, I like, hey, part, I'll report that to her. So she knows that a part got triggered, and she can see the part getting triggered. I'll say, I'm going to go and sit with this part and give it some resource, and I come back and I'm an adult again. And the relationship moves forward in evolution because we didn't get stuck in the habitual patterns that relationship can get stuck in. All relationship. We acknowledged and owned the little parts of us that maybe are wounded or didn't get resourced or seen. We resourced them, we reported them, we up-leveled, and then the relationship up-leveled. And I think that is a practice for all of humanity, dealing with politicians, dealing with technology, dealing with everything. It's all about checking in with those and owning those internal inner parts, and then reporting and connecting and taking responsibility, like our friend who used to be screaming all the time. And she up-leveled and maintained her family and her friendships, and eventually the screaming part got quieter, and she could lead a better life. And it really, for the 21st century, comes down to our individual work on those parts, reaching out for group, for help, the medicines, everything. Because if we get peaceful inside, we have peace in the world, and we have a beautiful world by being peaceful and beautiful in our own systems.
Yeah, I think there's a Zen saying that says, when you sit, like in meditation, when you sit, the whole world sits with you. Yeah, in other words, yeah, yeah. Well, I think this probably is, you know, just a kind time to bring it to a close, just in terms of people who are going to be watching this and listening to this, having their brains stretched. What was it Tom Robbins said in the endorsement to the Archaic Revival, you know, that you're never going to be going back to Kansas, you know, after reading that book. It's kind of similar with these very far thinking, far envisioned ideas. So I want to thank you very much for that. But before I let you go, would you like to, as I mentioned before we hit the record button, I can put little titles and things under this when I run it through Final Cut Pro before publishing it on the Stephen Gray Vision YouTube channel. And so are there any sites or links? I mentioned damer.com. We can mention that one again, and I'll put that up again. But is there anything else you would like to point people toward?
Yeah, we're holding regular salons called the Levity Salon. I call everything levity, in that Terence used to talk about novelty. The listeners probably remember this. And one night I said to Terence, we have enough novelty. We need more levity. We all laughed at that. And Sasha Shulgin, for me, looking into this man's blue eyes toward the end of his life, as you have done undoubtedly at the Shulgin Ranch there, I saw the greatest levity. in those eyes, even though they were not seeing the world, but there was levity in them. And so we seek to carry forward the traditions of these two great storytellers, inventors, alchemists in our levity salons. And this kind of thing, usually 30 to 50 people show up. And in the Patreon, if you go to patreon.com/Bruce Damer, you can join and not only get notification of these salons, but all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to be writing 2 books. One is for the scientific community. One is for everyone else, a human readable book on all this stuff. And I've got looks like I have a publisher for the science book. And on the back of all that, it'll certainly the popular book, and it may be illustrated, it may be a graphic novel, because I've got a wonderful friend who's connected with the comic industry, and they started transcribing some of the Levity Zone podcasts to try to create a graphic novel out of it all. And so with the Patreon, if you can support $5 or $25 a month, that'll help these projects get done, and you'll get all the early looks at the fantastic treatments of all this and videos and everything else. So the Patreon community is now, I think it's almost 100 people, and it's growing, and it's helping me to have some independence and some time to create these products for everyone.
Wonderful. I'll make sure, as I said, that I put that up as a title. And as a closing from my end, I'd like to say thanks very much again. I really do appreciate you a lot in what you're doing, Bruce, and I think you might be too humble to acknowledge it on some level, but you just referred to great minds like Alexander Shulgin and Terence McKenna, and the lineage of people that kind of keep us moving toward an upward curve, as it were. And I believe that you are, a strong member of that lineage, and thank you for the work that you have been doing, are doing, and almost, well, I would say certainly are going to be doing for hopefully another 20 or 30 years or more. So I'll thank you. And what was I going to say? Yes, can you stick around for a minute after we officially stop the recording, and we'll just do a little sort of, more casual ending that way.
And I look forward to returning to Vancouver and Spirit Plant Medicine sometime soon, and bringing Catherine and seeing my relatives, all my hometown relatives.
Unfortunately, it looks like it's still a ways off before they open that border for this year. But I'm hoping that you will give an online address. We're going to the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference this was supposed to be our big woohoo 10th anniversary, and we're not going to call it that. We're going to call it our first online Spirit Plant Medicine Conference instead. But we're going to have 2 or 3 days at the same time we were going to, October 23rd, 4th, and 5th, or possibly just the 24th and 25th. That's a weekend, but one way or the other. You and I have spoken, and I think in general you've agreed to contribute to that, so that'll be wonderful too. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely happy to do that.
Okay, let's end it here. Thanks very much.